सल्लू अलैहि व आलिहि सल्लू अलैहि व आलिहि सल्लू अलैहि व आलिहि सल्लू अलैहि व आलिहि। मैं एक तस्वीर भी शेयर करना चाहता हूँ in the group, which is very relevant to this. वो जैसी मुझे मिल जाती है तो फिर मैं कर देता हूँ, क्योंकि वो एक बहुत खूबसूरत कलेक्शन है टॉपकापी म्यूजियम के अंदर इस्तांबुल में। वहाँ पे जो आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की जो तलवारें थी, कुल 9 थी। तो वो जो है उनमें से एक जो मुझे बहुत पसंद थी, वो उसकी तस्वीरें मेरे पास थी, लेकिन वो मैं अभी खैर ढूंढ के जो है वो सबके साथ शेयर करता हूँ। Very elegant works of art. They are, of course, they were greatly crafted.
The Battle of Badr. The Prophet now drew up his army, and he passed in front of each man to give them good heart and to straighten the ranks, bearing an arrow in his hand. Stand in line, O Sawar,
he said to one of the helpers who was too far forward, and he gave him a slight prick in the belly with his arrow. O messenger of God, thou hast hurt me, said Sawad, and God hath sent thee with truth and justice. So give me my requital. Take it, said the Prophet, laying bare his own belly and handing him the arrow, whereupon Sawad stooped and imprinted a kiss where it was his due to place the point of the shaft. What made thee do this? Said the Prophet. And he answered, O Messenger of God, we are now faced with what thou seest, and I desired that at my last moment with thee, if so it be, my skin should touch thy skin. And the Prophet prayed for him and blessed him.
Quraysh had now begun to advance. Seen across the undulating dunes, the Meccan army appeared to be much smaller than it was, but the Prophet was fully aware of their true numbers and of the great disparity between the two hosts. And he now turned to the shelter with Abu Bakr and prayed for the help which God had promised him. A light slumber came upon him, and when he woke, he said, Be of good cheer, Abu Bakr. The help of God hath come to thee. Here is Gabriel, and in his hand is the rein of a horse which he is leading, and he is armed for war. In the history of the Arabs, many a battle had been averted at the last minute, even when two forces were drawn up face to face. But the Prophet was now certain that the battle would take place, and that this formidable array was the one of the two parties that he had been promised. The vultures also knew that carnage was now imminent, and they were already in wait to feed on the carcasses of the slain, some wheeling overhead and others perched on the rocky slopes in the rear of either army. It was moreover clear from the movements of Quraysh that they were preparing to attack. They were already near and had halted within easy reach of the cistern which the Muslims had made. It seemed likely that their first move would be to take possession of it.
Aswad of Makhzum strode ahead of the others, clearly intending to drink. Hamza went out to meet him and struck him a blow which severed one of his legs below the knee, and a second blow which killed him. Then Utbah, still smarting from the taunts of Abu Jahl, stepped from the ranks and gave the challenge for single combat. And for the further honor of his family, his brother Shayba and his son Waleed stepped forward on either side of him. The challenge was immediately accepted by Auf of Najjar, clan of Khazraj, who had been one of the first six of the helpers to pledge themselves to the Prophet ﷺ, and with Auf stepped forward his brother Muawwidh. It was their quarter in Medina that Qaswa had chosen as the ultimate halt of the Hijrah. The third to accept the challenge was Abdullah bin Rawaha, who had defied his leader Ibn Ubay in speaking words of welcome and comfort to the Prophet ﷺ. Who are ye? Said the challengers. When the men answered, Utbah said, You are noble and our peers, yet we have naught to do with you. Our challenge is against none but men of our own tribe. Then the herald of Quraysh shouted, O Muhammad, send forth against our peers from our own tribe. The Prophet ﷺ had not intended anything else, but the eagerness of the helpers had forestalled him. Now he turned to his own family, since it was above all for them to initiate the battle. The challengers were two men of mature age and one youth. Arise, O Ubaidah, he said. Arise, O Hamza. Arise, O Ali. Ubaidah was the oldest and the most experienced man in the army, a grandson of Muttalib, and he faced Utbah while Hamza faced Shayba and Ali faced Waleed. The combats were not long. Shayba and Waleed were soon lying dead on the ground while Hamza and Ali were unhurt. But at the moment when Ubaidah struck Utbah to the ground, he received from him a sweep of the sword that severed one of his legs. It was a triple contest, 3 against 3. So Hamza and Ali turned their swords on Utbah and Hamza gave him the death blow. Then they carried their wounded cousin back to their camp. He had lost a mortal quantity of blood and the marrow was oozing from the stump of his leg. He had only one thought. Am I not a martyr, O Messenger of God? He said as the Prophet approached him. Indeed, thou art, he answered.
The tense stillness between the two hosts was now broken by the sound of an arrow from Quraysh, and a freedman of Umar fell to the ground, fatally wounded. A second arrow pierced the throat of Haritha, a youth of Khazraj, as he was drinking at the cistern. The Prophet now exhorted his men, saying, By him in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, no man will be slain this day, fighting against them in steadfast hope of his reward, advancing, not retreating, but God shall straightway enter him into paradise. His words were passed on by those who heard them to those who were out of earshot. Umair of the Salima clan of Khazraj had a handful of dates which he was eating. Wonder of wonders, he explained. Is there naught between me and my entering paradise but that these men should slay me? And he flung away the dates and he put his hand to his sword in eager readiness for the word of the command. Auf was standing near to the Prophet, disappointed at having lost the honor of the challenge he had been the first to accept. And he now turned to him and said, O Messenger of God, what is it that makes the Lord laugh with joy at his slave? At once came the answer, when he plunged without mail into the midst of the foe. And Auf began to strip off the coat of mail he was wearing, while the Prophet took a handful of pebbles and shouting at Quraysh, defaced be those faces. He hurled the pebbles at them, conscious that he was hurling disaster. Then he gave the order to charge. The battle cry he had devised for them, Ya Mansur Amit, resounded from every throat as the men surged forward. Auf without his mail and Umair were among the first to meet the enemy, and both fought until they were slain. Their deaths and those of Ubaidah and the 2 killed by arrows brought the number of martyrs up to 5. Only 9 more of the faithful were to die that day, amongst them that other Umair, Saad's younger brother, whom the Prophet had wanted to send home.
Thou threwest not when thou threwest, but it was God that threw. These words were part of the revelation that came immediately after the battle. Nor were the pebbles the only manifestation of divine strength that flowed from the hand of the Prophet on that day. At one point where the resistance of Quraysh was at its strongest, a sword broke in the hands of a believer, whose first thought was to go and ask the Prophet for another weapon. It was Ukasha, a kinsman of the family of Jahash. The Prophet gave him a wooden club, saying, "Fight with this, Ukasha." He took it and brandished it, and it became in his hand a long, strong, gleaming sword. He fought with it for the rest of Badr and in all the Prophet's other battles, and it was named Al-On, which means the divine help. When the believers were ordered to charge, they did not charge alone. As well the Prophet knew, for he had been promised, "I will help you with 1,000 of the angels, troop on troop." And the angels also had received a divine message. When thy Lord revealed unto the angels, "Lo, I am with you, so make firm the believers. I shall cast terror into the hearts of the disbelievers. It is for you to strike off their heads and to smite their every finger."
The presence of the angels was felt by all, as a strength by the faithful and as a terror by the infidels. But that presence was only visible or audible to a few, and in varying degrees. Two men of a neighboring Arab tribe had gone to the top of a hill to see the issue and to take part, so they hoped, in the looting after the battle. A cloud swept by them, a cloud filled with the neighing of stallions, and one of the men dropped instantly dead. His heart burst with fright, said the one who lived to tell of it, judging from what his own heart had felt. One of the believers was pursuing a man of the enemy, and the man's head flew from his body before he could reach him, struck off by an unseen hand. Others had brief glimpses of the angels riding on horses whose hooves never touched the ground, led by Gabriel, wearing a yellow turban, whereas the turbans of the other angels were white, with one end left streaming behind them. Quraysh was soon utterly routed and put to flight, except in small groups where the angels had not passed. In one of these, Abu Jahl fought on with unabated ferocity until Mu'adh, the brother of Auf, smote him to the ground. Ikrimah, the son of Abu Jahl, then struck Mu'adh and all but severed his arm at the shoulder. Mu'adh went on fighting with his good arm, while the other hung limply by its skin at his side. But when it became too painful, he stooped and putting his foot on his dead hand, jerked himself up, tore off the incumbent limb, and continued in pursuit of the enemy. Abu Jahl was still full of life, but Muawwid, Auf's second brother, recognized him as he lay there and struck him a blow which left him dying. Then Muawwid passed on, and like Auf, he fought until he was slain.
Most of the Quraysh escaped, but some 50 were mortally wounded or killed outright in the battle or overtaken and cut down as they fled. About the same number were taken captive. The Prophet had said to his companions, "I know that men of the sons of Hashim and others have been brought out despite themselves, without any will to fight us." And he mentioned by name some of those whose lives should be spared if they were caught. But most of his army were in any case bent on holding their captives to ransom rather than putting them to the sword. Since Quraysh so greatly outnumbered the believers, the possibility of their rallying and returning to the fight had still to be considered. And the Prophet was persuaded to withdraw to his shelter with Abu Bakr, while some of the helpers kept watch. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh was standing on guard at the entrance with drawn sword. When his fellow warriors started to bring their captives into the camp, the Prophet was struck by the expression of strong disapproval on his face. "O Sa'ad," he said, "it would seem that what they are doing is hateful in thine eyes." Sa'ad vigorously assented. Then he added, "This is the first defeat God hath inflicted on the idolaters, and I had rather see their men slaughtered than left alive." Umar was of the same opinion, but Abu Bakr was in favor of letting the captives live in the hope that sooner or later they might become believers, and the Prophet inclined to his view. But later in the day, when Umar returned to the shelter, he found the Prophet and Abu Bakr in tears on account of a revelation which had come. "It is not for a prophet to hold captives until he hath made great slaughter in the land. You would have for yourselves the gains of this world, and God would have for you the hereafter. And God is mighty, wise." But the revelation then made it clear that the decision to spare the captives had been accepted by God and should not now be revoked. And the Prophet was given a message for the captives themselves. "O Prophet, say unto those captives who are in your hands, if God knoweth any good in your hearts, he will give you better than that which hath been taken from you, and he will forgive you. Verily, God is forgiving, merciful."
There was, however, one man, Abu Jahl, who clearly could not be allowed to live. The general opinion was that he had been killed, and the Prophet gave orders that his body should be searched for. Abdullah ibn Masud went out again to the battlefield and searched until he found the man who had done more than any other to stir up hatred of Islam amongst the people of Mecca. Abu Jahl still had enough life in him to recognize the enemy who now stood over him. Abdullah had been the first man to recite the Quran aloud in the front of Kaaba, and Abu Jahl had struck him a severe blow and wounded him in the face, for he was merely a confederate of Zohra, and a poor one at that, his mother having been a slave. Abdullah now placed his foot on the neck of Abu Jahl, who said, "Thou hast climbed high indeed, little shepherd." Then he asked him which way the fortunes of war had swung that day, his implication being that next time they would swing in the opposite direction. "God and his messenger have won," he answered. Then he cut off his head and he took it to the Prophet. Abu Jahl was not the only chief of Quraysh to be killed after the fighting had finished. Abdurrahman ibn Auf was carrying coats of mail which he had taken as booty, and he passed by the corpulent Umayyah, who had lost his mount and was unable to escape. With him was his son Ali, whose hand he was holding. Umayyah called out to his one-time friend, "Take me prisoner, for I am worth more than coats of mail." Abdurrahman agreed, and throwing down the mail, he took him and his son each by a hand. But as he was leading them towards the camp, Bilal saw them and recognized his former master and torturer. "Umayyah," he explained, "the head of disbelief, may I not live if he survive." Abdurrahman protested that they were his prisoners, but Bilal repeated his cry, may I not live if he survive." Wilt thou not hear me, thou son of a black mother?" said the outraged captor. Whereupon Bilal shouted with all the power of the voice that he had won him the function of muezzin, "O helpers of God, the head of the disbelief Umayyah, may I not live if he survive?" Men came running from all sides and narrowly encircled Abdurrahman and his two captives. Then a sword was drawn and Ali was struck to the ground but not killed. Abdurrahman let go the father's hand. Make thine own escape," he said. "Yet no escape there is, for by God I can avail thee nothing." Pushing him aside, the men closed in upon the prisoners with their swords and quickly made an end of them both. Abdurrahman used to say in after years, "God have mercy on Bilal. My coats of mail were lost to me, and he robbed me of my two prisoners."
जी सहर आप पढ़िए, फिर फारूक साहब के पास आज किताब है, फिर आपके बाद वो पढ़ लेंगे.
Ji, the Prophet gave orders that the bodies of all the infidels slain in the battle should be thrown into a pit. And when the body of Utbah was being dragged towards it, the face of his son Abu Hudayfa turned pale and was filled with sorrow. The Prophet felt for him and gave him a look of compassion, whereupon Abu Hudayfa said, "O Messenger of God, is It is not that I question thy command as to my father and the place where they have thrown him, but I used to know him as a man of wise counsel, forbearance, and virtue, and I had hoped that these qualities would lead him unto Islam. And when I saw what had befallen him, and when I remembered what state of disbelief he died in after my hopes for him, it saddened me. Then the Prophet blessed Abu Hudayfa and spoke to him words of kindness. Should I go on?
जी
जी,
और थोड़ा
Shubham.
पढ़ लें
The
एक
peace
और
and quiet, the peace and quiet of the camp was soon broken by voices raised in anger. For those who had stayed behind to guard the Prophet demanded a share of the booty, and those who had pursued the enemy and captured men and armor and weapons were unwilling to give up what their own hands had taken. But before the Prophet had time to restore harmony by ordering an equitable distribution of all that had been captured, the desired effect was achieved more simply and more immediately by a revelation. They will question thee concerning the spoils of war. Say, the spoils of war are for God and the messenger. So the Prophet ordered that everything that had been taken, including the captives, should be brought together and no longer be considered as the private property of any individual. The order was at once obeyed without question.
The most eminent of the captives was the chief of Amir, Suhail, cousin of Sauda. आवाज आ रही है आपको? And the brother of her first husband. Others more closely connected with the Prophet were his uncle Abbas, his son-in-law Zainab's husband Abul As, and his cousins Akil and Nawfal. He gave a general order that all the captives should be well treated, though clearly they had to be bound. But the thoughts of his uncle suffering such duress prevented the Prophet from sleeping that night. And he gave orders that his bonds should be loosed. Other captives received less indulgent treatment from their nearest of kin. Musab passed by his brother Abu Aziz as he was being bound by the helper who had captured him. And he said, "Bind him fast, for his mother is rich. And it may be that she will ransom him from thee." "Brother," said Abdul Aziz, "is this how thou doest commend me to others? He is now my brother in thy stead," said Musab. Nonetheless, Abu Aziz used to tell him that after years of the good treatment he received from the helpers who took him to Medina, whence his mother ransomed him for 4,000 dirhams. Should I continue? As soon as it became clear that the 800 or more Meccan troops still at large had been routed beyond possibility of rallying, the Prophet sent Abdullah ibn Rawaha to take the good tidings of victory to the people of Upper Medina. That is the more southerly part of the city, and he sent Zaid to the people of Lower Medina. He himself remained with the army at Badr. And that night he went and stood by the pit into which the bodies of the enemies of Islam had been thrown. "O men of the pit," he said, "kinsmen of your Prophet, ill was the kinship ye showed him. Liar ye called me, when others took me in. Against me ye fought, when others helped me to victory. Have ye found it to be true, what your Lord promised you? I have found it to be true, what my Lord promised me." Some of his companions overheard him and wondered at his speaking to dead bodies. "Your hearing of what I say is not better than theirs," he said, "but they cannot answer me."
Early next morning, he set off for Medina with his army and the spoils. Two of the most valuable captives, that is, those whose families could be relied upon to pay the full ransom of 4,000 dirhams, were Nadr of Abd Dar and Uqba of Abd Shams. But these were two of the worst enemies of Islam. And if they were allowed to return, they would immediately resume their evil activities, unless the Muslims' victory at Badr against such odds had made them reflect. The Prophet's eye was now constantly upon them, but there was no sign of any change of heart in either man. And during the march, it became clear to him that it was not in accordance with the will of God that they should be left alive. At one of the first halts, he gave orders that Nadr should be put to death, and it was Ali who beheaded him. At a subsequent halt, Uqba suffered the same fate at the hands of a man of Aus. The Prophet divided the remainder of the captives and the rest of the spoils at a halt within 3 days' march of Medina, giving insofar as was possible an equal share to every man who had taken part in the expedition. By that time, Zaid and Abdullah ibn Rawaha had reached Medina, and there was great rejoicing amongst all except the Jews and the hypocrites. But Zaid was given sad news in exchange for his good news. Ruqayya was dead. Uthman and Osama had just returned from burying her. The lamentations in that part of the city were still further increased when Zaid told Afra of the death of her 2 sons, Auf and Muawwid. Sauda went between her own house and theirs to join the mourning in both. For Afra, there was joy mingled with sorrow on account of the glorious manner of her sons' deaths. But Zaid had also to tell Rubayyi of the death of her youthful son Haritha ibn Suraka, whose neck had been pierced by an arrow as he was drinking at the cistern. And as soon as the Prophet himself returned, a few days later, she came to him and asked him about her son, for she was troubled by the thought that the youth had been slain before the battle had started and before he had time to strike a blow for Islam. O Messenger of God, she said, wilt thou not tell me of Haritha, so that if he be in paradise, I may bear my loss with patience, and if not, I may do penance for him with weeping. The Prophet had already answered such questions in general, for he had promised that a believer is rewarded for what he purposes, even if he should not achieve it. Deeds are counted according to the intention. But he now answered her in particular, saying, Mother of Haritha, in paradise are many gardens, and verily, thy son hath attained unto the all-highest, Firdaus.
मुझे इस चैप्टर में सबसे अच्छी स्ट्राइकिंग बात, बाकी तो जाहिर है सारा बड़ा खूबसूरत नैरेटिव है, लेकिन एक जो अच्छी चीज़ है ये कि एक तो मुसलमानों का हजूर के साथ जो लड़ने का जज्बा और सारा कुछ था, सेल्फ सेक्रीफाइस थी, वो बड़ा क्लियरली सामने आती है। मगर एट द सेम टाइम जो उनकी जो ह्यूमन फैक्टर था उनके अंदर, जो नेचुरल एक फियर भी होता है, एक उसकी माल गनीमत की ख्वाहिश भी होती है, जो एक ह्यूमन एस्पेक्ट है, वो भी वो ओवरलुक नहीं करते, उनको वो एज एंजल्स पोर्ट्रे नहीं करते। मतलब जो नैरेटिव है इट इज बिलीवेबल, हम जैसे इंसानों के लिए इट इज बिलीवेबल कि वो लोग जो थे वो मतलब आखिरकार इंसान थे, मतलब उनको उनके तरफ हर तरह की टेंडेंसीज भी थी और उसके बावजूद वो इस लेवल पर थे। तो ये ह्यूमन फैक्टर जब वो बयान करते हैं, ये मैंने देखा है और किसी भी किताब में इस तरह बयान नहीं होता है। उनने हमेशा उनको सुपर ह्यूमंस के तौर पे, जाहिर है वो बड़े बुजुर्ग लोग थे, सहाबी थे सारे, लेकिन उनका ह्यूमन जो एस्पेक्ट है वो लोग बयान नहीं करते। यहाँ पे बड़ा अच्छा ये बयान करते हैं, एंड देन वी कैन रिलेट टू देम, मतलब मोर क्लोजली के मतलब उनके भी फियर्स थे, उनकी भी ख्वाहिशात थी, पीछे फैमिलीज थी, सारा कुछ था। तो ये शेख अबू बकर बड़े खूबसूरत तरीके से बयान करते हैं। ये बड़ी खास बात है इस सीरत की किताब की।
और इसकी शायद वजह ये है कि ये जो अर्लीस्ट सोर्सेज हैं वो काफी मतलब है, वो भी बड़ी सीधी हैं, अरबों के स्टाइल की हैं शायद, और उस जमाने के बहुत करीब की हैं, 1-2 जनरेशन बाद ही की हैं। और ओरल तो मतलब अनब्रोकन ही था। तो ये भी तो इससे मतलब मुझे जो ख्याल आता है वो ये आता है कि हमें वो ओरिजिनल सोर्सेज जरूर पढ़नी चाहिए। सीरा इब्न इसाक जो सबसे पुरानी है वो उर्दू में अवेलेबल है, और उसमें भी ये क्वालिटी है कि वो लोग उसमें शेर और शायरी और डिटेल्स है, जाहिर है इन्होंने तो स्टोरीज तो नहीं, ये तो खैर बहुत ही मास्टरफुली शेख अबू बकर ने तो बड़ी खूबसूरत स्टोरी बनाई है, उसमें वो बात तो नहीं है, मगर है तो ओरिजिनल सोर्स, बहुत सा कुछ उसी में से लिया हुआ है इस स्टोरी। जी मेहर, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे?
I'm really overwhelmed with Battle of Badr. मुझे इसके साथ जितनी दफा भी हमने पढ़ी थी, I think अभी I was thinking of what led to this, you know, जो शुरू वाला हिस्सा है, like रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की पूरी रात इबादत में जो गुजरी थी, you know, so they speak of the prophet's character कि उनकी एक रात की मेहनत थी और एक दिन की, so just his relationship with all the people around him. और यहाँ पर जो, क्योंकि अब हम आगे काफी you know हम अब आपस में पढ़ने में we reached a point post hijra, so मैं ये देख रही थी, this is like the second year, तो अभी ज्यादा वक्त नहीं गुजरा हुए, they were separated from the very same people that they're facing. So ये जो अभी फारूक साहब ने बात की, you know, the human aspect, imagine facing, I'm just trying to imagine what it would have been like for everyone. और ये जो जज्बा है, जो ये 13 साल की मेहनत थी ईमान पे, इन सारे लोगों की जिनका यहाँ पर जिक्र किया जाता है, the first 3 combats, it's not a regular battle. There was nothing regular about the Battle of Badr. इसलिए इनका I think दर्जा ही बिल्कुल फर्क है बदरियों का. And the more you read it over and over again, it was written so beautifully, and it's very like emotive. सारी बस सिर्फ emotion ही invoke करता है. I found myself really like I got really emotional at nothing but ये जो अबू हुज़ैफा वाला point था, where जब उनका दिल थोड़ा सा you know आ जाता है अपने वालिद को देख के, and just his thoughts at that time, and having these kind of it's such a human thing, and the prophet to give him tasalli at that point in time. और उसके बाद just again मेरा वो तो साथ साथ है ये कुरान की, आप कुरान नहीं समझ सकते without this beautiful life that we're reading. It's not possible. So अब उन्होंने सवाल पूछा तो हम यहाँ पे देखते हैं, जब हम सूरह अनफाल पढ़ते हैं तो हम बस सूरह अनफाल पढ़ते हैं, you know, you're not transported like this in this manner. I can go on and on, so I'm going to pause now.
Yeah, that was a very nice point about the Quran being so intimately connected to very earthly situations. वो जाहिर है इस सीरा के या किसी भी यानी कि सीरत नबी के बगैर वो फिर कॉन्टेक्स्ट नहीं आता, बड़ी ये भी सही बात है. सना, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे?
वन थिंग जो मुझे इस पूरी बुक में एक कॉमनैलिटी नजर आती है वो ये है कि the writer is able to stand in virtually every person's foot, मतलब in feet. आपको लगता है कि कई दफ़ा इंसान किसी एक पर्सन का इमोशनल नैरेटिव तो बयान कर सकता है, लेकिन इतने मुख्तलिफ लोगों के इमोशंस को समझना और फिर 4-5 सफ़ों में इस तरह की इमोशनल अप्स एंड डाउन्स लाना कि आपको लगता है as if you're just standing there and observing the very intense situation. और the way he started this chapter कि एक इतनी बड़ी मुहिम सर पे है, और नबी पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम से एक सहाबी एक बड़ी छोटी सी ट्रिवियल सी एक ट्रांजैक्शन है कि आपने मुझे पोक कर दिया, you know, if I have to get somewhere really early and if my daughter or my son does this, so I just have a meltdown. And we're having the first battle with the kuffar, and मतलब हमारे टाइम पे तो हम कहेंगे the audacity, you know, you're doing this right now, अभी कोई टाइम है ये चीज करने का. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam paused and he dealt with him, no belittling, no telling him कि you know we are at a very difficult situation. तो इस चैप्टर में जहाँ इतनी बड़ी बड़ी डीप हैपनिंग्स हो रही हैं, वहाँ पे नबी पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की लोगों की छोटी छोटी चीजें, छोटे छोटे इमोशंस, छोटी छोटी खुशियां उदासियों पे भी उसी तरह नजर है जिस तरह उस पूरी बैटल पे है. सो हाउ इज दैट इवन पॉसिबल फॉर अ ह्यूमन बीइंग टू बी फंक्शनिंग एट सो मेनी डिफरेंट इमोशनल इंटेलिजेंसेस कि मतलब ये मैं नहीं समझ सकती कि एक वक्त में एक इंसान इतनी पर्सनालिटीज के साथ डील कर रहा है और सबका दिल रख रहा है और फिर कुफार के लिए भी परेशान है, मारना भी नहीं चाह रहे, बचाना भी चाह रहे हैं, शुहदा भी चाह रहे हैं, अपने पास भी रखना चाह रहे हैं. So it just baffles me. It's only him who could have done this, and then it also baffles me, the writer of this book. I must have spent a lot of time, I think, sitting at Badr, contemplating Badr. You cannot have written this book. I mean, the way he's explaining the cistern, he must have sat there with some books, with some maps, and with divine inspiration. That's how he's written this chapter or this whole book. It could not have been written by just reading other books. So this is a very special gift that was given to Dr. Martin Lings. And मैं तो सिर्फ ये सोचती हूँ कि बयान इतना अच्छा वो कर गए, तो बयान से बाहर जो बातें उनके दिल में रह गई वो क्या थी? What were those things that he has experienced but not yet been able to, despite being a scholar of Shakespeare, there are a lot of things जो वो महसूस कर गए और अपने साथ ले गए, और बहुत थोड़ा सा हमारे लिए छोड़ गए. So that's what I feel.
Very beautiful. Thank you for those comments. राबिया एज़दी, आप शेयर करना चाहेंगी?
मैं तो काफी स्पीचलेस हो गई हूँ ये पढ़ के, और मैंने पहली दफा ये वाला चैप्टर पढ़ा है. एक्चुअली मैंने इससे पहले नहीं पढ़ा हुआ था. सब लोगों ने बहुत ही खूबसूरत बातें की हैं. What struck me in a big way was actually सबको बहुत ह्यूमन लग रही है ये चीज, मुझे तो बहुत ही सुपर ह्यूमन इनकी क्वालिटीज लग रही हैं, क्योंकि टू स्टैंड इन द फियर ऑफ डेथ एंड हैव सो मच क्लैरिटी, मैं इससे बहुत ही ज्यादा, मुझे नहीं समझ आ रही कि किस तरह है ये. तो ऑब्वियसली हुजूर सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की प्रेजेंस और उनकी सारी जो थी टीचिंग्स और वो सारा कुछ, उनकी रूहानी टीचिंग्स भी obviously brought these people to this level. So it wasn't just intellect that he imparted to them, it was a level of obviously spirituality. But I'm just very overwhelmed with this, I don't know, itni clarity and facing death and just the desire for paradise and going into the battlefield. मैं सोच रही हूँ कि बहुत ही मुश्किल काम है ये इस तरह से चले जाना, और I don't know, it's just anyway, I think it's very overwhelming. And also वही वाली बात कि this idea जो last paragraph में है, you know, the yearning for paradise, I think it's very beautiful, but I think I personally can't relate to it because मुझे तो पता भी नहीं कि क्या है ये सब, होता क्या है paradise और ये सारा, death का ही नहीं समझ आती. तो so I'm still trying to like absorb all this, but really ये और ही दर्जे के लोग हैं, इनकी alchemy, इनकी chemistry भी कुछ और ही होगी जो मैं कम से कम नहीं, मतलब बहुत ही ज्यादा मुझे इससे हो रहा है.
थैंक यू राबिया, बहुत ही जबरदस्त. इससे मेरे खास एक पॉइंट याद आ रहा है, मुख्तलिफ टीचर्स से जो सुना है कि अरब्स की कुछ क्वालिटीज थी जो जाहिलिया सो कॉल्ड अरब्स थे, यानी कि प्री इस्लाम अरब्स, दे हैड सर्टेन क्वालिटीज एंड परहैप्स दैट्स द रीजन दैट दे रिसीव्ड द रेवलेशन. गो के उनका डायरेक्शन तो इसमें इस शिवलरी और ये बहादुरी और लड़ते तो रहते ही थे, तो वो एक अरब कल्चर का भी, इसमें ट्राइबल कल्चर की कुछ क्वालिटीज, बड़े अपने कॉल के पक्के और ये सारा कुछ ना, बड़ा ऑनर वाले जो एस्पेक्ट है ये, बल्कि मैंने शेख अबू बकर से भी सुना हुआ है कि उनकी बहुत सी क्वालिटीज थी विच वर देन इट वाज, वो भी अभी मुझे पूरा सही याद नहीं आ रहा. होपफुली जो लास्ट सिटिंग में आएंगे मुस्तफा, वो बहुत बेहतर आर्टिकुलेट कर सकेंगे. ये भी एक एस्पेक्ट हम उनसे पूछेंगे फिर इंशाल्लाह.
ओके, इंटरेस्टिंग, थैंक यू.
आपकी बात से मेरा ध्यान उस तरफ जाता है कि वो आप वाकई काफी जो उस जमाने की सोसाइटी और उसकी भी इसमें झलक आ रही है, द होल ईथोस ऑफ वॉरफेयर एंड ऑनर एंड ऑल. तो मगर आप सना की भी और आपकी बात की जो 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 इसमें कैप्चर हुआ, दैट्स द मल्टीफैसेटेड, वो वैसे वाकई समझ से बाहर है कि, और वो उन्होंने कैप्चर कर लिया है कि एक जमीनी हकायक है, एक सोल्स के हकायक है, एक फेथ का हकायक है, फिर डिवाइन हेल्प भी है. तो इट्स अमेजिंग कंसंट्रेशन है एक तरह की, लगता है कॉन्ट्रास्ट की वो उस पे हम वो सोचने वाली, समथिंग टू कॉन्टेम्पलेट एंड थिंक अबाउट. ट्रू. जी सहर, आप कुछ? हाँ
एक
जी
सवाल
राबी.
छोटे से कर सकती हूँ. ये जो वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग little detail about the turban of Hazrat Jibrail alayhi salam being yellow. किसी को इसका कोई है? Because I find it very interesting, this whole symbolism and this reference. पर इसका क्या है? मतलब क्या है इसका? If we go into it.
इमीडिएटली एक तो जहन में आता है कि ये जो चारों आर्कएंजल्स हैं, इनके अपने अपने वो दे चेक करेंगे किसी sort of जो माइथोलॉजी कहेंगे क्या, इट्स ऑल बेस्ड ऑन हदीस एंड इसराइलियात वगैरह, मगर वो चेक करनी चाहिए. मुझे आती तो नहीं है ज़बानी, मगर दैट क्वेश्चन sort of takes one mind to. There are mythical descriptions of the four archangels.
Okay.
तो एक चैप्टर एक है, मैं आपसे या तो हाँ जी.
इस पे एक बात हमने पढ़ी थी when doing Badr earlier, and that was कि Zubair ibn Awam का पीला turban था during the Battle of Badr, and this was to strengthen his faith and to support him because he was one of the generals in that army.
नहीं, ये राबिया
Like,
गैब्रियल का पूछनी थी ना कि वो उस बार गैब्रियल का पूछनी थी.
जी उन्होंने पीला टर्बन, मतलब ये हमें बताया जाता है कि I guess इसमें it's written this way, but I know that Zubair ibn Awam's turban was also yellow, so he was aided.
That I see. That's what you say. ठीक है. जी सहर, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगी?
I wanted to share was, एक तो मेरे लिए वो बहुत सीन जो है जहाँ पे one of the believers while fighting, उनका नाम मैं तलाश कर रही हूँ, when his arm was severed and he bent to the ground and put his hand under his foot to shake off that severed arm. तो वो मेरे लिए मैं सोच रही थी कि माशाल्लाह तो sorry for their long gone, but किस किस्म का ईमान था जो जिसने इनको अपनी बॉडीज के बारे में पेनलेस बना दिया था. they were like out of their bodies with the strength of their ईमान. मतलब वो इस तरह डिस्क्राइब हुआ है कि वो उसने अपना बाजू उतार के फेंक दिया. ये तो बिल्कुल ही, मतलब मुझे ये बहुत लगा कि ईमान का लेवल है कि उनके बाजू कट के गिर गया, उनको एक तरह से पी लिया. ही went on fighting till he was put to death, जब तक वो शहीद नहीं हो गए. एक ये बहुत ही ईमान की मैक्सिमम ताकत. और इसके अलावा जो एंड है वो शायद मैं भी एक मदर हूँ और आई कैन रिलेट के वो जो माँ पूछती रही हजूर सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम से कि if her son is going to attain paradise, तो वो जो जिस तरह जिन अल्फाज में हजूर सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम how he has been ranked among the highest in Jannah, तो वो that's the point where I had tears in my eyes, क्योंकि मेरा ख्याल है कि इससे ब्यूटीफुल ईमान एक माँ का नहीं हो सकता जो अपने सबसे प्यारी चीज भी खो बैठती है, लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम शी इज सो इलेटेड कि वो उसको उनके बेटे को इतना अजीम रैंक अगली दुनिया का मिल गया है. मतलब ये बस हजूर सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के तो कैरेक्टर है ही, लेकिन उनके अलावा मैं इन दो लोगों से बहुत, इस माँ से बहुत इम्प्रेस हुई, एंड द वन हु वेंट ऑन फाइटिंग विदाउट हिज आर्म. इन दो पर्सनालिटीज से बहुत इम्प्रेस हुई. थैंक यू सो मच.
थैंक यू, ब्यूटीफुल वर्ड्स. और मेहर, आपने बहुत ही खूबसूरत ये रिवायत, बिल्कुल ये राबिया ने सवाल पूछा था उससे बिल्कुल मुताबिक रखती है. तो मानूर, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे इस रीडिंग के हवाले से?
तो इस तरह के निकेसी मौके पे जो, क्योंकि ऑफ कोर्स उनके अंदर सारे डिवाइन एट्रीब्यूट्स हैं, तो जहाँ अल्लाह जमाल भी है वहाँ अल्लाह जलाल भी है. इस तरह के मौके पे फिर उनका जलालीपन जो है वो आगे आता है, और इसमें फिर किसी किस्म का डर नहीं होता इसमें, क्योंकि जब वो कह सकते हैं कि आप भी कंट्रोल में नहीं होते, क्योंकि अल्लाह आपको कंट्रोल में ले लेता है. और जो आपका डर होता है, जो आपकी अंदर की जो सब कुछ बस चला जाता है, क्योंकि आपका अपना भी कंट्रोल नहीं होता है। और जहाँ तक हमारी हजूर की बात है, तो वो तो फिर हमारी जो उस वक्त उम्मत थी उसके साथ एक थे। तो जब वो जा रहे थे तो उनको सबको पता था कि हमारे साथ हैं, उनको फील होता था, उनकी प्रेजेंस फील होती, क्योंकि वो तो उनके अंदर तो सब थे, चाहे दूसरों के अंदर सब नहीं थे, लेकिन उनके अंदर तो सब थे। जो जो लड़ रहे थे, एक एक इंसान उनके अंदर था। तो उनकी प्रेजेंस, उनकी जो रूह थी, वो उनको हिम्मत भी देती थी, ऑफ कोर्स, क्योंकि उनके लिए तो वही सब कुछ था। तो
थैंक यू, जबरदस्त, बहुत खूबसूरत। जी मिशेल, आप मौजूद हैं तो कुछ कहना चाहेंगी?
आवाज आ रही है?
बहुत जबरदस्त।
बहुत कुछ तो नहीं, मैं एक्चुअली ये चैप्टर अभी इससे कुछ 20 मिनट पहले ही पढ़ना ख़त्म किया था, बिकॉज मैंने पहले नहीं पढ़ा था, एंड आई वाज स्टिल struggling to get out of all the different emotions it had put me through, and then we went through it again after reading. But yes, the way you can sort of feel every character's anxiousness, hope, जज्बा. आई थिंक हज़रत बिलाल का जो सेंटेंस जो बोला था कि he I said may I not live if he survived, that really got to me कि जो torture उनके ऊपर incur किया गया था, and then to see your torturer live after this epic war, it's just too much. But where it stopped for me, and I think the thing that just stayed, is this idea of hoping for people's hearts to still turn. So Abu Huzaifa का जो था, the despair he had for his father, and even उसके बाद Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who was hoping on his way back कि जो दो captors हैं उनके भी hearts turn हो जाएं, and I was hoping कि शायद कुछ इस तरह से, and I think even now some of us in our people we know or our families, sometimes we do hope for these things. तो ये aspect बहुत relatable था, and it just left you feeling a little bit sad कि ज़रूरी नहीं है कि ये हो, it didn't happen in that big event, so हम क्या चीज़ है कि हम इस चीज़ को hope रखते हैं for people around us.
वेरी ट्रू, थैंक यू मिशेल। वलीद, आप आखिर में अपने व्यूज दीजिए प्लीज।
एक इसके अंदर ये जो है ना कि only 9 more of the faithful were to die that day, amongst them that other Umair, Saad's younger brother, whom the Prophet had wanted to send home. ये बेसिकली जो इससे पिछला जो चैप्टर था ना, द मार्च टू बदर, उसके अंदर एक बड़ा खूबसूरत ये वाकया बयान किया जाता है। ये मेरे दिल के बेहद नज़दीक है ये वाला। It actually inspired me to go for a protest to Waziristan in 2013, जब ड्रोन्स के बहुत उधर इश्यूज चल रहे थे और बहुत ज़्यादा बेचारे बच्चे जो है मारे जा रहे थे, और उनके लिए प्रोटेस्ट करने हम गए थे। तो ये जो किस्सा है, ये जो पिछला चैप्टर, उसमें बयान इसका बड़ा खूबसूरत है कि लोगों को जब खड़ा किया जाता है कि कौन जा सकता है कौन नहीं जा सकता ग़ज़वे पे, तो ये उमैर जो होते हैं, हज़रत उमैर रज़ी अल्लाह अन्हो, ये छोटे होते हैं और आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम उनको कहते हैं आप वापस चले जाओ, आप बहुत छोटे हो अभी। तो ये रोना शुरू हो जाते हैं और ये जिद करते हैं कि मैंने जाना है, और इनका जुनून और जज्बा ऐसा होता है कि आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम, ये ही इज ओनली 14 years old और समथिंग, आई थिंक, ये हजरत उमैर जो होते हैं रज़ी अल्लाह अन्हु, तो आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम जो है वो इजाजत दे देते हैं उनको। और ये इनके जुनून और जज्बे का कोई बंदा बयान नहीं कर सकता कि इतनी छोटी से बचपनी से उम्र में ये ग़ज़वे में शरीक भी हो जाते हैं और फिर घबराते नहीं हैं। और इनके बारे में कहा यह जाता है कि जब ये आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम इंस्पेक्ट कर रहे होते हैं ना रैंक्स को, तो ये कांप रहे होते हैं। तो इनको इनके साथ में मेरा ख्याल है कि पूछते हैं कि आप क्यों कांप रहे हो, आपको डर लग रहा है? तो कहते हैं मुझे जंग से नहीं डर लग रहा, मुझे डर लग रहा है कि मुझे वापस घर ना भेज दें। ये उनकी कैफियत होती है। और फिर जब गजबे में उनको इजाजत मिल जाती है शरीक होने की, तो वो शोहदा में से सबसे पहलों में से होते हैं, क्योंकि वो छोटे होते हैं और वो दौड़ तेज सकते हैं, तो सबसे आगे पहुंच जाते हैं और सबसे जल्दी जाके शहीद भी हो जाते हैं। So I found that to be so deeply inspiring कि मैं अपनी उम्र पे, मैं अब 40 साल का होने वाला हूँ, मुझे घबराहट होती है इस तरह की सिचुएशंस के अंदर। And here's this child who is just fearless, and it's very inspiring.